Hello everybody, in this Hearthstone video we're going to be going over 10 of the most overrated Hearthstone cards in history. These cards aren't necessarily top tier picks that you would see in Constructed all the time, but given how people think about the cards, their performance in reality is usually quite underwhelming. Number 1, the Light Warden. This is a minion that was originally released in the classic set as a card you could just play straight up. Blizzard kind of realized that it wasn't really that great, particularly in the one class where you'd want to play it, which is Priest, given that they can heal a lot. So they created a card called Light of the Naru, which can summon a Light Warden for free. However, I still see people occasionally draft the Light Warden inside of Arena mode, which is actually a pretty weak play in most cases, because if you play this on turn 1, it's only situationally going to be able to trade. In most cases, it's just going to be a 1-2, or, if you're lucky, a 3-2 that required 2 extra mana of investment to use your heal power to make a heal happen. However, in almost all cases, you're guaranteed to get better results by just drafting any other random card. A standard 2-drop is guaranteed to be able to trade with your opponent's 2-drop, but this guy is only situationally going to be able to trade. And that's after investing some extra mana into buffing it up. Number 2, Lord of the Arena, a 6-mana 6/5 taunt that's overvalued by both new players and arena players alike. The fact that this guy has taunt and is a relatively big body may seem tempting. However, for the stat line you're getting, paying 6 mana is just way too much, especially considering that this minion has a lower health pool than an attack pool, which is a really bad thing for taunts especially. If you play the Lord of the Arena towards the end of a match, then you're probably just going to be delaying the inevitable. A couple of weak, small minions that your opponent played on early turns are going to easily run into this guy and plow it out of the way. Just like the Booty Bait Bodyguard, which is considered a terrible taunt because it is, the Lord of the Arena has a bad stat line and is overpriced for the amount of stats you're getting. Number 3, Mortal Strike. This is a card that has actually seen play from time to time and constructed inside of Face Warrior decks for its ability to bypass taunts and finish an opponent off no matter what they put in your way. However, what is absolutely disgusting about this card is that unless you have the rare circumstance of being almost dead yourself, this card does not come anywhere near the power level of a Fireball. Dealing 4 damage for 4 mana is actually very sad. For that effect, you could just play Fist of Jaraxxus in a Warlock deck. Except in ideal circumstances, you're almost guaranteed to get more value out of any standard 4-drop like a Kor'kron Elite or Piloted Shredder over this card. Yet, you will still see the Mortal Strike be played in quite a few Face Warrior decks. Number 4, the Murloc Knight. This is not a bad card by any means, and in Arena, it's actually a pretty high tier pick. However, what I tend to notice people try to do with the Murloc Knight is that they think that by setting up a Murloc Knight on the board on, say, turn 4, that they've basically ensured themselves the game, and they just throw that thing down immediately because they just know the next turn they're going to get to hero power and then they'll get a free Murloc. But in reality, most Murlocs are actually pretty weak. You aren't getting a tremendous amount more value out of a Murloc Knight in most cases than you would be just by playing a Silverhand Regent and hero powering to get an extra guy. Yet I see so many people play this card confidently, thinking that they've locked out the game because they get an extra 1/1 Murloc on the board. It's definitely a good arena card, but it's not that good. Number 5, the Foe Reaper. When this card was first announced for GVG, it looked like an incredibly scary legendary, and it is when it hits the field and doesn't get removed, because the ability to target one minion on your opponent's side of the field and hit both of the adjacent minions without taking any damage on the Foe Reaper itself is immensely threatening. But what myself and some other players failed to realize initially was just how slow this card is. You won't see it played anymore in Constructed because for an 8-cost minion, you have to have it do something the second it hits the board. Playing a Foe Reaper is just asking for a Polymorph or an Entomb to happen, subsequently followed by you immediately losing the game. That said, in slower formats like Arena, it is still a solid pick. Number 6, the Gadgetzan Jouster. I don't know what it is about this card, but quite a few people playing control decks like to throw this into their deck, particularly warriors, thinking that they'll win the Joust because they have such high cost cards in their deck, and then they'll have a 2-3 on the board. But there's two problems with that line of thinking. One, if you're that desperate about winning the board on turn 1, you would always play a Zombie Chow because it's a guaranteed 2/3. And secondly, there's a big problem with a 1-mana Joust minion, and that's that it has anti-synergy with itself. If you put 2 Gadget Sand Jousters in your deck, it's very possible for them to actually deny the Joust because you had 2 in the deck and 1 drew the other one with the Joust. Beyond that, Joust as a mechanic is actually disfavored for winning because ties go to your opponent, you won't get the bonus effect. So a lot of the time, the Joust just doesn't even go off and then it's just a 1/2. Number 6, the Jeweled Scarab. I'm not gonna say this is a bad card, because it's not. But a lot of people think it's okay to actually play this card in some circumstances where it's really not. Like, let's say you're playing more of a Zoo-style Warlock deck, but then you happen to play the Jeweled Scarab thinking you're completely fine so that you can get that greedy 3-drop into your hand. There are actually cases where that's not the right play. In some cases, you really do want to hold on to your board control because the tempo will gain you a lot more than getting that extra card added to your hand early will. If you play the Jeweled Scarab, you are throwing away tempo, and while it is a good card, that is something that a lot of players fail to consider as much as they should. Number 8, the Junkbot. Now at this point in the game, people have seen Junkbot around enough to know that it's pretty much a garbage card, but initially when GVG was about to come out, people were like, whoa, you can actually get some nice stat buffs by playing the Junkbot, and a few people tried to put it into their competitive decks, which is really cool. People trying cards out that seem good on paper, but are actually pretty bad in reality. It's sad, but the problem with Junkbot is that it's just so hard to get it to a good stat line. You would actually have to sacrifice 2 minions on your board, 2 mech minions at that, to make it a 5/9, in which case it's still vulnerable to silence, but a 5/9 is very solid for 5 mana. The problem in most cases is that for it to be effective, the setup is at least as hard as getting a 2-card draw off of a Cult Master being played onto the field. If your opponent is on point about removing your mechs from the board, which usually is the case, then Junkbot's effectiveness is completely crippled, and the worst thing that can happen is ending up playing it as a 1/5, which is pitiful. Number 9, the Kazan Mystic. This card has been on the borderline of viability because so many decks in the last, I'd say, year or so have happened to be secret-based Mage, Hunter, and Paladin decks. As a result, a good portion of control decks have actually spliced one of these cards into their deck, thinking that it'll get them a massive advantage, and in those very specific matches, like a Kazan Mystic versus a Freeze Mage, it is powerful. However, the cost of playing a situational card like this over a card that's consistently good like Piloted Shredder is usually not worth it. It's a nice benefit when it does work, but you gotta remember, the stat line on this thing is absolutely terrible, so when it doesn't work, or it can't work because it's not the right matchup, it's just a card that's gonna slow you down. Finally, number 10, Knight of the Wild. Another card that's not inherently bad, but if you look at the card, theoretically it sounds really good. When you summon a beast, reduce the cost of this card by 1, so you could bring it down to a 5 mana 6/6, a 4 mana 6/6, or even less, which is insane, right? The problem with this card having actually been viable since its announced at TGT is twofold. One is that Beast Druids just aren't powerful enough yet. That may very well change with the new expansion set, Old Gods coming out, like Mark of Yasarj, which is a powerful card in Beast Druid decks for sure. But beyond that, getting the mana cost of this card reduced and to be effective is very situational. You would either have to keep this card at the start of the game, which may mess up your mana curve at some point, or draw into it really early, and even if you do get it down to a low mana cost, you may run into the situation where you only wanted to play 1 card that turn, and you were going to float a lot of extra mana anyway. A 6 mana 3/3 on turn 7 is only really a big deal if you actually have something to use that extra 4 mana for. So while this card is definitely good in a Beast Druid deck, and will probably make it into future Beast Druid decks if those end up being a thing, it definitely wasn't the card which by itself churned Beast Druid into a thing. Mid-range combo Druid still blew it out of the way by miles. So that's it for this top 10 list on the most overrated cards in Hearthstone. Do you agree with me, or do you have very different opinions about which cards are actually overrated inside of Hearthstone? So for now, I've been Dog Skeleton, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider checking out my Patreon and casting a couple shekels my way. Till next time, guys.